So, that all being said, I'm going to get on with my talk about Rauschenberg. This is a real challenge. I don't get overwhelmed by many artists that I talk about, but this guy is absolutely overwhelming to me. Um, I again, you know, I'm familiar with this work for many, many years. I've seen it around and all that. I thought I knew something, but when I start digging in, this guy is just remarkable. Um, it's it's really Photoshop before there was Photoshop. It's just the kind of absorption that goes on in his work, taking in and synthesizing so many different trends in art at the time, coming out of abstract expressionism, but also dealing with the transition from that into pop and into minimalism and performance art, and all these different aspects are all there in his work. Um, and one of the things I want to say is there's a good heart underneath all of this. He is quite funny. He's got a great sense of humor, but there's also a warmth to the work that for all the trickster aspect of it, there's a real human heart beating beneath the surface of this stuff. Um, so he was a painter, sculptor, printmaker, set design, costume designer, participant in collaborative um, art forms of many kinds. In fact, collaboration is an essential agreement in Bob's innovative approach to art. Um, Best known for his combines, which, this collection is really a a fine example of an early piece of a combine where it's collage, it's um, assemblage. There's these wooden pieces that are attached to it. There's this borderline between sculpture and painting. Um, there's the remnants of the abstract expressionist mark making in there, but there's something else going on here. There's the integration of everyday objects. Um, a a there's newspaper articles strewn in there. There's um, socks and plastic and this, that, and the other thing. He would go out on the streets near his studio in New York and just like go around the block and gather objects from the street and use them. Um, so one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about right now is the Rauschenberg Foundation builds on the legacy of Robert Rauschenberg, emphasizing his belief that artists can drive social change. Rauschenberg sought to act in the gap between art and life, valuing chance and collaboration across disciplines. So you can see what the description is here of this piece: oil, paper, fabric, newspaper, printed reproductions, wood, metal, mirror on three canvas panels. So it's a triptych. So there's this history that's in there. The triptychs in inside the Gothic cathedrals throughout Europe. Um, So it's a very interesting game that we're playing here. What I'm going to start off doing is there are four shows in New York. There are shows that are taking place all around the world right now, celebrating the 100th anniversary of his birth. But there are four that are in New York, and I'm gonna go right to them before I go into his bio and all that, because I want to make sure I get to them because there's so much that I poured into this presentation that I don't know if I'll get to it all. So I want to make sure I get to these. And the first one is a print survey. Um, and it looks like a really great collection. I've looked through the samples that they've got in there, and I've explored some of the pieces. So it's really, you know, it's printmaking of various kinds. There's transfer printing, there's lithography, there's offset printing, there's digital printing, there is collage along with the prints, there's fabric integrated into them. There's all kinds of things going on. So this is a survey of four decades of his prints. And printmaking, again, this business of collaboration. When an artist does print with an organization like GEL, they're working with really great professional printmakers, and it's a collaborative process. So this is a show that would be worth seeing. It's on through December 20th, so we got some time to be able to get there. Uh, then we'll move on to this, which is a close-up, a detail of a piece that's on at the Guggenheim. And the name of that show is Collection in Focus, Robert Rauschenberg, Life Can't Be Stopped, which is perfect. May through on through May 3rd. So it actually is opening when the heck is the 10th? So it's opening October 10th and going on through May 3rd. And this has, let's see, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this show has 14 pieces from their collection. And one of the pieces they've got is a long silkscreen mixed media painting called Barge from 1962-63 that's 32 feet long. That's going to be in there. And this other untitled piece, which again is no small piece. It's 82/48 by 6 inches deep, and it's a combine. So there's objects attached to it. Um, Over on the left is a photo taken by Cy Twombly of Robert Rauschenberg when he was at Black Mountain College in 1951. I believe at that point Rauschenberg was teaching there, though he did study there before that. So I'm not sure if he was teaching yet or what. But Cy Twombly was one of his students who they ended up having an affair and all that, but I'll talk more about that later. Um, all right. The other, let's see, the next show, if I can get there, is at the Gray Art Museum, which is at NYU. And as Bob implied in all of this stuff, he did have a sense of of social obligation, of a position that an artist can fulfill in society as a voice. for um, the issues at hand for the whole race. Um, in 1970, he settled in. Actually, he went to Captiva Island first to do a project and fell in love with the place. And so Rauschenberg's sense of environmental crisis took on new urgency as he witnessed oil spills and dwindling bird populations on the island. I try to use my art to communicate that you yourself must take responsibility for life on Earth. And so this show that's on at the Gray um, Art Museum is of his environmental pieces. So basically, there's a set of that are on there. Okay, now this show is a show of Steve. Okay, uh, I don't know. I don't know what just happened, but let's see. Can you guys see me? Okay. Okay, good. Now let's see if I can get the image back up again. uh, share. Sorry about that. And let me here. Okay, right. So, can you all see me? Can you see the images now? Someone chat me. Yes, great. Okay. Technology. Okay. So this is a very interesting show, and he used a lot of these photographs in his paintings and did screen prints from them and used them in his litho pieces and things like that. The other show that I'm gonna put up is this is a show from the Menil Foundation that's down in Texas. If you're down in Texas, go see it. But the one thing that I wanted to bring out is his works on fabric. Rauschenberg Rauschenberg's work broke boundaries and embraced the spirit of experimentation, the qualities that remain profoundly evident in artists and in society today. So his impact um, is really profound. You can see, environmental pieces when you walk into the Whitney, you see artists doing things that are off the wall all the time now. But this was really uncommon, and this was, you know, something. Bob went to India and saw all these fabulous fabrics and really wanted to use them in his work. Okay, so this all being said, we're going to move on to a brief bio. I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible because we've got so much to get to with this guy. Um, so he was born uh, in Port Arthur, Texas, and basically his parents, his father was you know, he worked for the Gulf States Utilities and light and power company. Um, his mother had a great sense of humor. Um, so uh, but Port Arthur was a really working class town, and there wasn't a lot of um, support for an odd bird like Bob was right from his beginnings, and he knew he had to get out of there one way or the other. Um, he basically went to the University of Texas at Austin at 18, um, where he began studying pharmacology, but dropped out shortly um, due to difficulty with the coursework, because he actually later they realized that he was dyslexic. But who the heck knew anything about dyslexia back in the 40s? Um, so basically, both of his parents, he came from they were fundamentalist Christians, so he was kind of an odd bird in that situation. So he joined the Navy. Basically, was drafted. It was during the war, so he was drafted into the Navy. Um, but he basically um, said, he couldn't kill people. So they actually assigned him to a hospital neuro psychiatric technician, um, and by 46 he left the Navy and decided that he wanted to study art and went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and then from there went to Paris and studied at the Académie Julienne for a period of time, where he met his fellow art student Susan Weil, and you see the picture right there in the center of the screen of Rauschenberg with Susan. And you see on the right that they were married in June of 1950. Now, in between all that, um, there are several things that I will cover, but basically, Susan Weil decided that she really heard about this great college, Black Mountain, wanted to go there, and so did Bob. So they both went, and that was a big turning point in his life and his understanding of art. At that time, Joseph Albers was the head of the school, um, gave Rauschenberg a real hard time, but that real hard time was beneficial to Rauschenberg. He said that he needed the discipline. And so let's see. All right. Um, Meanwhile, in 1948, 49, Susan introduced Rauschenberg to this method of exposing blueprint paper. And they did these pieces um, that were large scale. I mean, this is 70 by 41, 104 by 36, and you see Bob exposing the blueprint paper on the left, on the right, excuse me, and um, they were not conceived as a series, but what ended up happening is somehow or other Life magazine got wind of this, and there was an article in 1951 of these blueprints. Now, you know, they were both college students at that point, so unheard of exposure. Um, and you know what Life magazine meant back then. Okay, at at um, at Blue Mountain at the college, they were really exposed to a lot of different things. Uh, and as I said, Rauschenberg was doing Photoshop before there was Photoshop. So these combined negatives, um, the picture on the left is um, Bob and Cy in Venice, and that little piece that's at the top was one of the um, uh, assemblage pieces, tiny assemblage pieces that Bob was working on while he was in Italy, and actually had a show in in Italy. Um, but you know, and he actually sold a few pieces, but the critic that reviewed the show said they should all be thrown in the Arno. And actually, that's what Bob did with the rest of the work. um, Below, you see a shot of John Cage, Merce Cunningham, and Rauschenberg together in 1964. Now, he met all of them at the college. And so we're going to move on to some of his early work. And these white pieces anticipated minimalism that hadn't really been played with at this point. This is an interesting piece of business, and the crossover between Cage's thinking and Rauschenberg's thinking are really fascinating. And we're going to spend a couple of minutes. I really want to keep moving, but Cage writes a statement about the white paintings for an exhibition that Rauschenberg has at Stable Gallery, which is one of the avant-garde galleries in New York at that time. To whom? No subject, no image, no taste, no object, no beauty, no message, no talent, no technique. Why no? No, no idea, no intention, no art, no object, no feeling, no black, no white, no. And after careful consideration, I have come to the conclusion that there is nothing in these paintings that could not be changed, that they can be seen in any light and are not destroyed by the action of shadows. Hallelujah. The blind can see again. The water's fine. So what does all that mean? Well, these pieces actually um, address something that has to do with the transition between art and life. That the interaction of your presence in front of this canvas, the way it changes the light reflected on that canvas, the color of your presence on the canvas reflected on it, the different times of day, the different nuances of light all affect what the canvases look like. Now, what Cage took from that is the awareness that we need to bring to everything in our lives, that there are things around us all the time that are affecting us. Um, he created a piece that was performed for the first time at um, the Woodstock, which was basically um, there's a residential thing up there, and the theater had had doors out into the woods in the back. So they opened up the doors, set up the piano. The piece was called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. The pianist, who was a well-known pianist, came up, the audience gathered, they all sat, and um, out came the pianist. He sat at the piano for 30 seconds, shut the lid on the piano keys, sat for another 30 seconds, opened up the lid for the piano keys, sat. This went on in intervals. So you can imagine the sounds outside in the night coming in, the growing discomfort of sitting in that audience and not knowing what was going to come next and when was the performance going to start. When does the performance start? So what these guys are playing with is this business of bringing awareness to where we are now. Okay, it's it's an event that's taking place, and that's it. That's the event. So take it for what you will. This is thinking now. There's a book that is very well known of essays by John Cage called Silence, and you know uh, it's well worth a read because it's actually something which may help in some ways enhance experience of life. Okay, I'll leave it at that. So, next piece that we're talking about is Robert Rauschenberg erasing a de Kooning drawing, and this is a real what he did. Let's see if I can find my paperwork. He knew de Kooning from the college because he was teaching down there, uh, and um, went up and knocked on his door in New York, and de Kooning, he was hoping that he wouldn't answer the door, and he did, and Bob asks him if he can erase one of his paintings. Um, and one of his drawings. And de Kooning quite literally says, yes, but I want to find one that's going to be really difficult for you. Um, Reluctantly, de Kooning agreed. He went through a pile, and at first he was looking through ones that, he didn't care about. But then he realized that he wanted to do something that was really a challenge that had a lot of different kinds of marks on it, pencil, grease crayon, all this other stuff, and he had some oil paint on it. Gives the drawing to Bob, and Bob takes it off to his studio and spends a month trying to find erasers that would take the mark making off. And this is the result. And basically it was exhibited in one of Rauschenberg's shows in 1953. Um, and what was the point of this? Well, it's moving on. It's it's clearing out. The abstract expressionists had taken up so much room that there was not much room for anybody to move on from there. And this was basically one of Rauschenberg's ways to move on from abstract expressionism. Not that he didn't admire de Kooning's paintings or Franz Klein or Pollock, but there was more to be done, and that's where they moved on from. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Um, so, oh, here is a Jasper Johns, the flag, and this set of paint cans by Rauschenberg. This combine, it was actually in the collection of Jasper Johns. Um, and the flag piece again, it's a very laden image. The American flag has a lot of resonance, a lot of meanings. That was not his purpose. His purpose was to paint the thing and let it stand for itself. And you bring what you bring to it. Um, these paint cans are actually quite beautiful textures and well designed form. This Rauschenberg is not a piece of junk. It really is well designed. If you look at it, look at the increments. Uh, Interesting stuff. So these guys were integrating. They were integrating the world around them into their paintings, where the abstract expressionists, let's see, there's this kind of tragic or angry or um, existential angst that's behind all this work. The mark as some inherent assertion of a unique existence. Um, some heavy philosophy behind all that. Where Bob and Jasper were, maybe not so much. The freedom of marking, the not being chained to literal representation, um, that's something that interested them. The other interesting part about this is this whole idea of the unique mark. Well, Klein used to do these wonderful little drawings on with ink on, basically it's a telephone book. He just used it was cheap, so he could use that stuff. What he would do is take these when he hit on one that he liked, put it into an overhead projector, an opaque projector, and project it onto the canvas, and then paint it. And so these spontaneous marks were a transfer from this smaller version. Interesting stuff. And Marilyn, boy, he really got her. Old de Kooning was pretty good at that. This piece is in the Neuberger Museum. If you haven't seen it, it's really a wonderful painting. And I think that both Rauschenberg and Johns appreciated the quality of the abstract expressionist painting, it's just time to move on. Uh, there's breathing room here. All the angst and heavy weight of the abstract expressionists. So, uh, let's see. I'm going to keep moving here. I'm going to have to move pretty fast now because, it's taken me so much time to get here. Um, Bed is one of Bob's really well-known um, combines. It's an early one, um, and basically it is there's all the kind of abstract expressionist splashy marks in there, but there's the familiarity of that comforter. It's a comforter. Um, uh, you know, one of the critics said, "Oh, it's like a axe murder took place there, and all this splash of red and all that." Well, uh, Bob said, "No, I meant it as a really, you know, uh, quiet painting in a lot of ways, a very comfortable painting. I half expected to find somebody curled up asleep in it. Not really, but still, I mean, using the everyday object, using the familiar along with the painted um, experience is part of what he's up to with these combines. Um, and I'm gonna keep moving up. There's a picture of Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. They were lovers at that time. They had a falling out in '58, which I don't need to go into, but basically, um, they were really supportive of one another in these early '50s because there was not a whole lot of other people doing what they were doing. It just uh, let me move along here. Ah, here's a Kurt Schwitters. Kurt Schwitters. This was from 1947. There was a show of his collages and assemblage pieces in the early '50s in New York, and Rauschenberg would have seen that show. Um, so Kurt Schwitters comes out of the Dadaist movement. That was kind of an anti-art movement, um, though these are so exquisitely put together. They are beautifully designed pieces, and uh, I see a gorgeous harmonic piece of art in this sloppy mess. Um, and he did do wood add-ons and things like that. But here's Rebus, one of Rauschenberg's combines, and again, you see him throwing in, you know, uh, newspaper clippings and postcards and fine art along with comic strips. If you look in that dead center, you see a Botticelli along with the Katzenjammer Kids. It's kind of high-low mixture. And here are a couple of Schwitter's um, assemblage pieces. I just threw those in so you could get some context. You know, it, Rauschenberg may have been off the wall, but he was not that far off the wall. He did become more off the wall, come to think of it. So let's go there. And here we have it. Monogram, very well known piece. There's homoerotic implications about the ram going through that uh, inner tube. We're not going to talk too much about that either. But basically, it it's off the wall. It's on casters. This piece took him 4 or 5 years to develop. He started out with this Angora goat and had it in various positions in his studio. You can see it over here on the left. Um, it was basically shifting around, and it was on the wall, it was off the wall, and finally he put it on the casters so it could be moved around. Interesting piece. I'm going to keep moving along, though. I've got to move pretty quickly now. Um, Again, um, this little section out of this Rauschenberg is kind of like the Gottlieb symbol of a sunrise or a sunset. Um, but Rauschenberg has to tie it to reality. Literally, he puts a tie in the painting. Uh, and here is a set design for Merce Cunningham. Their interaction was ongoing. He actually danced in a couple of pieces, and I'll show you an image of one of those later. But he created this combine for the dance piece for Cunningham. And a lot of birds appear in these pieces, and a lot of taxidermy chickens and things like that. Um, Birds that don't fly. I don't know. I'm not gonna. What was that? What was that one? They're like a dream, but I'm not gonna make an attempt to interpret them. Oh, okay. And again, um, this eagle um, was very controversial at the time when it was done. Somebody asked something in the chat, and male chicken rooster. Yeah, there's that. So let's see. Okay, and this is a set from Dante's Inferno, and and it was done in 1958. He went down to Florida to, I think, to do these pieces. It was kind of a retreat, and that was kind of his first exposure to Florida, which he really loved. These pieces are transfer prints. They're basically, he takes the photograph and takes the paper and soaks it in lighter fluid, and then rubs on the back of it with the pencil with the graphite, and the color transfers, and then he paints and collages into them. Um, Very interesting series. There's also all this stuff about the gods and goddesses under these pieces that you know he he may have been dyslexic, but people read to him. In fact, he had someone read him the cantos so he could illustrate these pieces. And Cy Twombly was a very scholarly fellow, and would have passed that on to Bob when they were together. He read, um, uh, I believe he could read ancient Greek, which is some feat. Um, okay, again, we're in the crossover between politics and art, and Rauschenberg really um, fuzzed out the edges between things. It's really like, um, the paintings are sticky. They absorb everything around them. They take in the streets and they take in the newspaper and they take in the monuments and they absorb onto these canvases. Here's a portrait of Rauschenberg by Avedon. So by this time, he was very successful. By the by the early '60s, he had a show, I believe, at the Jewish Museum, and there was really a lot of acknowledgement for the groundbreaking work that was going on with him. At that time, Warhol was doing his thing. The pop artists were really coming to the fore. Now, I see a real difference between Rauschenberg's work and a lot of the pop artists because there's these are soulful pieces in a lot of ways. They they acknowledge the history of art. They acknowledge the presence of today. They take in all of it and and say yes to it all in a way. Um, it's not it's not snide work. It's very much, that business of absorption. Um, and besides, they're beautiful pieces. Uh, here's Rauschenberg um, performing Pelican. Uh, one of the dance pieces. He's on roller skates. So he didn't have the dance movements that the Cunningham dancers did, but basically he got in there and did his performance. Uh, let's we'll keep moving. And constantly experimenting with new technologies. He really got into working with scientists and in the '60s especially, he was computer science was just coming to the fore. He was exploring all this stuff and very interested in that. uh, Earth Day. He did the first poster for Earth Day, so his ecological consciousness was definitely there. Um, and here we are. By this time, he bought a house on Captiva Island, and these images started to integrate into his work. Less of the 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 grimy city streets and more of the rhythms of nature coming in, but also the things that washed up on the shore. And these are some of the things that washed up on the shore. He did this whole series of cardboard pieces from box fragments that came in. Things were shipped to him, had an interesting look. Things washed up on the shore. He dried them out and used them. Um, you know, and basically, again, back to this fabric business, that he really loved different textures of things. He was doing these assemblage pieces, incredible stuff. I mean, the guy went on to just continue to explore all these things. These the piece on the right would be considered a print, though that's shaky business. All these different types of solvent transfers and silkscreen ink and fabric, um, electric lights, whatever he was up for it. The piece on the right is one of his prints, one of his photographs. That's actually, I think it may even be in the show that's up at the city of New York, the Museum of the City of New York. Um, and then this fantastic assemblage piece, uh, Pegasus. Talk about high and low. and there's actually headphones in there too. So this is a sonic piece. He did this whole series of pieces going to different countries and working with artisans and working with the images that were on the streets of whatever city he went to. So he went to Japan, and this is part of a kind of universal peace notion that he actually fostered in the 80s. Um, and here again, Venezuela, Mexico, Cuba, Malaysia, working with craftsmen, working with artisans there, gathering materials, gathering cloth, gathering paper from those unique places, going out on the streets and just picking stuff up, integrating it into the pieces. And again, look at the size of this thing. I mean, we're talking 60 by 144. So a lot of collaboration, he had student studio assistants, he had printmakers that he worked with. Um, very stimulating, very stimulated. Um, and one of the things, he drank a bit too much. That was one of the reasons why he kind of moved to Florida, because he was partying a little bit too hard. Now, he did have a son with Susan Weil, and they remained close, actually. His son was born in 51 and talked about, going to the studio when he was a child, going to his father's studio and meeting all these fantastic people that were hanging out there. So this collaborative business went on. Um, and by the way, Susan and he remained close. So I can't believe it. I made it through. We made it through. Um, and basically, these are a list of the shows. I have everything except for the show that's at the Gray Art Museum listed on here. The Rauschenberg Life Can't Be Stopped, 14 pieces at the Guggenheim. They're going to be there through April 5th. The New York Pictures. Oh, got a question. What's this? Let's see. Oh, you're welcome. um, the that show that is the print show looks like it's really worth a trip. I mean, because that's 40 years and it's going to be a survey taking in all of this stuff. Um, I'm there is so much more that I have inside my head to say about this man, but suffice it to say, he was a really great artist and a fabulous man, from what I can tell. So thank you all for joining me, and I will see you on the 7th again, hopefully. Um, come to the jazz. I'm reading the message. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of exhibits. There's exhibits all over the world. The other thing that I forgot to put down on here, oh, I'm glad you said that, um, is the foundation has an amazing website. There's so much that I could not fit into this presentation on that website. And they also have an indication of where all the exhibits are all around the world that are taking place to celebrate the 100th anniversary of his birth. Um, so yeah, well worth checking out. There's also two really marvelous films on Canopy. So just plug in Robert Rauschenberg, and there's two really good shows there. There's also a BBC one that's an hour-long talk that's fabulous also on YouTube. So, okay.